Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is famous for having a dream for all people to be free, to respect each other's rights, and live together in peace and brotherhood. King's words stirred the nation's conscience and changed America forever. Although the life of this young Nobel laureate was tragically cut short, his dream remains and continues to inspire millions of people today. Martin Luther King Jr. was born to a prominent Baptist minister and his wife in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Growing up in the South, King became increasingly aware of the injustice that was taking place in the American South, a land divided by segregation. Under segregation, blacks were not recognized as full citizens and usually had to attend separate schools, eat in separate restaurants, and use separate drinking fountains. Making matters worse, blacks frequently suffered insults, beatings, and even killings from racist whites. King was a bright student, and at the age of 15, he entered Morehouse College, where he learned of nonviolent resistance by reading Henry David Thoreau's essay, Civil Disobedience, and studying great thinkers, including Mahatma Gandhi. After graduation, King entered Boston University's School of Theology and met singer and peace activist Coretta Scott, who became his wife and the mother of their 4 children. King extolled, "She was the one who gave meaning to my life." After receiving a PhD in systemic theology, King and his wife decided they could be of more service to humanity if they moved back to Montgomery, Alabama to begin their ministry. The first major protest the Kings experienced against segregation was the Montgomery bus boycott, where in 1955, a black woman named Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to relinquish her seat on the bus to a white man. This prompted black citizens to form the Montgomery Improvement Association and elect King as its president. And that started one of the most influential boycotts in the American history. The goal of the boycott being to put justice in business. For 381 days, Montgomery's black citizens walked and carpooled rather than ride segregated buses. During the boycott, King's house was bombed. While many would have retaliated with violence, King insisted on nonviolence because violence would only breed more hate. King believed nonviolence means avoiding not only external physical violence, but also internal violence of the spirit. You not only refuse to shoot a man, but you refuse to hate him. He counseled his followers, "We must use the weapon of love. We must have compassion and understanding for those who hate us. We must realize so many people are taught to hate us that they are not totally responsible for their hate." King joyfully rode Montgomery's first integrated bus on December 21st, 1956, after the U.S. Supreme Court declared bus segregation laws unconstitutional. This victory proved that nonviolent resistance could be an effective tool for social change in America. Following this success, King co-founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, called the SCLC, and was elected as its first president. The media spotlighted him as a symbol of the civil rights movement. Fame, however, brought its own difficulties and dangers. King admitted, "Frankly, I'm worried to death. A man who hits his peak at 27 has a tough job ahead. People will be expecting me to pull rabbits out of the hat for the rest of my life. Dangers showed up while he was autographing his first book, Stride Toward Freedom, The Montgomery Story. A mentally disturbed black woman stabbed him in the chest with a letter opener. The blade landed so close to his heart that if he had sneezed, he would be dead. He would have died. Following recovery, the Kings moved to Atlanta, where King became co-pastor with his father at Ebenezer Baptist Church and continued his work with the SCLC. In this role, King led many nonviolent campaigns against social justice. One of the most challenging campaigns began in 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama, which King called the most segregated city in America. When King and fellow protesters marched in Birmingham, the police commissioner's men attacked them with clubs, police dogs, and fire hoses that were so strong, they were strong enough to rip the bark from trees and hurl grown men against buildings. Even so, King and other leaders convinced demonstrators not to retaliate with violence or weapons. During this campaign, King was jailed and his hotel room was bombed, setting off riots and bringing 3,000 federal troops to Birmingham. In May of 1963, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled the commissioner and his men out of office, marking a significant victory in civil rights. Continuing his civil rights campaign 3 months later, King traveled to Washington, D.C. There, more than 200,000 people, both black and white, gathered before the Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and experienced King at his finest. His sonorous voice resounded. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. King's address that day became one of the most famous speeches in American history. Unfortunately, though, at the time, not everyone shared his dream. In the following months, 4 black girls were killed in a church bombing in Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama, and 4 blacks were beaten unconscious by members of the Ku Klux Klan in St. Augustine, Florida. This violence ignited protests until President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed discrimination and segregation on the grounds of race, color, religion, or national origin. Later in 1964, King became the youngest individual ever to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Struggling to suppress tears, the 35-year-old leader accepted the prize on behalf of all who love peace and brotherhood. Less than 2 months later, the Nobel laureate was jailed again after participating in a voting rights march in Selma, Alabama. When released, King led thousands of protesters, both black and white, on a 50-mile march from Selma to Montgomery. King told marchers, if you can't accept blows without retaliating, don't get in the line. If you can accept it out of your commitment to nonviolence, you will somehow do something for this nation that may well save it. Indeed, the march hastened President Johnson's signing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Consistent with his belief in nonviolence, King opposed the war in Vietnam, asserting, "I would not fight in the war in Vietnam. I'd go to jail before I'd do it. I'm not going to continue to say to young men that if you feel it in your heart that this war is wrong, unjust, and objectionable, don't go in and fight it." Widespread criticism followed from the media and some of King's own supporters. Although sometimes feeling discouraged and that his work was in vain, King continued to press forward. After the launch of SCLC's Poor People's Campaign, King supported striking sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. There he delivered what would be his final address. King said, "Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything." The next day, April 1968, as King stood on the balcony of his hotel room, he was struck down by a gunshot to the neck at the age of 39. The bullet that pierced King's neck also pierced America's heart. But his dream lives on. It lives on in all who dare to dream of a more equitable world. It lives on in all who practice the power of nonviolence. It lives on in all who believe with him that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. We will now see a few of King's more famous quotes, followed by a song.